Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it is time for the Monday Q&As. So let's knock this out. And I know these might be a little later today than usual, but I've been kind of tied up. So, first question. Jason, is it bad to do both types of cardio combined after weightlifting? For example, a 10-minute HIIT, that's high-intensity interval training. Jump the rope, then 20 minutes LIIS, that's low-intensity steady state. Stationary bike. I've been doing it for over 2 months and I want to know if it fries my CNS. Please see it. I guess he put please see it because he wants me to see his question. Well, I saw your question, brother. It won't affect your CNS. Like, this is not going to cause CNS fatigue the way that you think. What it's going to cause is problems with adaptive stress. You're going to find it far more difficult to adapt to your other types of training, because when you do endurance training immediately after your other training, no food, no rest, nothing between, what ends up happening is that it blunts the training signal. So by doing the HIIT immediately after the weight training, you're going to reduce the stimulation of the weight training in terms of adaptation. You're still going to burn the same calories. You're still going to burn fat. You're going to burn through energy. You're not going to make as large of muscle or strength gains due to the adaptation that you stimulated in the weight room, because you're blunting that effect with a different stimulus immediately after. And the same will be said of doing the LIIS cardio right after the HIIT. You're going to blunt the strength training and the strength stamina component of the HIIT to some extent by adding the LIIS at the end. So actually, by doing them back to back, you're reducing the effect of the ones you do earlier on. However, the upside could be if you were trying to lose fat, that would be a really effective way to burn through as many calories as possible, because you're going to boost your metabolism tremendously from the EPOC from your weightlifting. The HIIT cardio is going to exhaust you further to the point where you don't have any strength left, but it's going to have a very large caloric burn during it. And then your EPOC is going to be elevated from the two, and all you can do is LIIS, but while you're doing that LIIS, you're going to burn through a lot of calories. So as a weight loss strategy, probably pretty effective, although I could see it burning you out and making you really exhausted in a calorie deficit. But yeah, it could be effective, absolutely, for that purpose. But just realize that all that cardio is going to blunt your strength training effect and blunt your gains to some extent. All right, next question. Hey Jason, in your video on improving punching power, you state that you'd like to see some type of clean performed to increase full body power. Why did you choose a clean instead of the push press? Also, would the push press be a viable movement for the goal of increasing punching power? Would doing both possibly yield better results? Thanks. The answer is doing both will probably yield much better results. When you're talking about punching power, we're not talking about just getting a strong punch, because if you know how to throw a basic punch, you've been trained to punch, whether it's a boxing punch or a martial arts style punch, and you get strong in the weight room even with the bench press, your punch is going to get dramatically more powerful. But when you're talking about getting a punch that's going to help you get that last 2, 3, maybe 5% more kinetic energy, because you compete in some sort of combat or contact sport to where you punch, whether it's MMA or boxing, then yes, I would like to see, for someone who wants to compete at a serious level in either of those, I would like to see both incorporated. Both a power clean as well as some sort of heavy push press. Those are going to help you tremendously in developing peak kinetic energy and peak explosiveness when you throw a punch. It'll help you quite a bit. They're both essential at that point. So please don't think I didn't think that the push press would be very useful. Those are both tremendously useful, and I would like to see both incorporated for that goal, if that is a serious goal for you. All right, next question. Hey Jason, I know you're not a fan of personally of pre-workouts, but because of my school and work schedule, the only time I can get to the gym is 5 a.m. I tried a pre-workout and it did help me wake up and get a good workout in that early. This is only the first one I tried. Do you have any tips on what to look for as far as ingredients go, or if you think one in particular is better? Don't like coffee. Caffeine. All effective pre-workouts include caffeine, because caffeine is your best pre-workout drug that's out there. Take some caffeine pills. Just don't go over the recommended dose. That'll help wake you up. If you don't like coffee, you'll get the same benefits of the coffee before you train. I do not like these overall pre-workouts for reasons that I've mentioned in the past. They will create a dependency, and you'll find that you suddenly need to be spending $30 or $40 a month on a product in order to get good workouts for the rest of your life once you get used to them. And the reality is the studies don't show any potential benefit in gains. They don't necessarily help you make progress, but then once you get hooked on them, you need them to continue to make progress. That's the problem. Whereas in caffeine is always easily, readily available. It's cheap. You can get coffee, you can get caffeine pills, you can get whatever. So if you start requiring a dependency on caffeine to do it, it's not necessarily going to affect you negatively. And the thing to keep in mind, a lot of us are already dependent on caffeine like me. I've been a massive coffee drinker long before I ever touched the weights. I love coffee. I don't plan on giving it up. So therefore, accordingly, I tend to drink a lot of it before I train, and that's the only pre-workout I use. But my dependency on caffeine existed prior to the training. All right, next question. Hey Jason, I'm curious about your opinion on E-Cigs. I understand that they're a more recent invention, so there won't be any long-term literature on them quite yet. But I'm still interested in your opinion on how they might affect gaining strength, muscle, lung efficiency, and health in general. Thanks. We can't say without more long-term studies to know how they're going to work. Are they going to be as debilitating as cigarettes in terms of things like cancer, lung capacity, performance as an athlete? Probably not, but they're certainly not going to help you. And I can't see them being beneficial towards that goal. But again, I mean, if you're addicted to cigarettes and you can't quit and you still want to be athletic and train, e-cigarettes would probably be your better choice. But I would still recommend that if those are goals that you really want to take seriously, you should probably consider coming off the cigarettes rather than use a crutch like the e-cigarette. And again, we don't have enough scientific literature to say for sure how dangerous they're going to be in the long term, both in terms of cancer risk as well as athletic performance. We just don't have enough data to answer that question yet. We'll know in another decade. All right, next question. A few weeks ago in the comments, you told me that past the novice phase, a lifter is probably not going to gain more than 1 pound of muscle a month. Best of luck past the novice phase gaining even a pound of muscle a month. That's really hard to do. Is it really necessary to put on the extra weight to gain that 1 pound or less of muscle? For a lot of people, yeah, it really depends on what type of gainer you are, whether you're an easy gainer, hard gainer, whatever that happens to be. For a lot of people, without eating a surplus of calories, particularly when they're drug-free, it becomes very difficult to make lean gains. You're going to generally gain at a certain threshold in order to get your performance up, recovery up enough, everything else. You very well might have to bulk at that point to where you're gaining more fat than you are muscle in order to make significant muscle gains. Your other option is to try to go the lean gains route or recomposition route. Not everyone can do that, but just realize that it's going to be a slower process. Now, for a lot of people, I do recommend that. People who don't want to gain fat, people who maybe gain fat really way too easy, aren't really well suited to bulk and cut, like guys like me. Unfortunately, bulking and cutting for me is a failure because of that, because I gain fat so easy because I tend to eat so much. I'm so hungry all the time that recomposition methods make more sense for me. For the guys who really struggle to gain size, who undereat, that type of bulking actually tends to work really, really well for them. The really skinny guys naturally, because it's always easy for them to take the fat off later. They'll gain a lot more muscle over the long term by doing it that way. So again, it kind of comes down to personal genetics and what your appetite is like, and factors like that in determining if this works or not. But just realize that no matter what, if you're not gaining fat, you will always gain muscle slower than you could be. That's just a simple reality. All right, next question. What happens if someone just stops all gear use suddenly? For example, if a special ops soldier was taking hostage behind enemy lines for a few weeks or months with no access to gear, would his body just shut down? Funny you mentioned that point. I do know a little bit about that and what drugs a lot of those guys use. Not going to go into why I know that. But testosterone cypionate, boldenone undecyclinate, and now testosterone undecyclinate are becoming very popular among these sort of guys. The thing is, those are drugs that stay in your system the length of time that you actually mentioned. It's not uncommon for medical purposes for testosterone undecoinate to be injected once every 8 to 12 weeks. Boldenone undecyclinate, same thing. These are substances with a 14-day half-life. So a lot of times, soldiers who happen to use these to increase their performance are actually going to take these before they go out in the field. So even if they're out there a couple months with no access, their levels are going to stay good. Now, at a certain point, of course, if you come off cold turkey, you're not able to train, not able to get your drugs, yeah, your testosterone is going to crash. It's probably not going to come back up to normal, and you're going to lose muscle and performance rapidly. That's the reality. That's how these things work. If you don't stay on them, you don't keep the progress from them unless you stayed within your natural limits of progress. But even then, you still sometimes get a negative rebound as a result of coming off. And you still might shrink even more and lose performance after you come off. That's just a reality. That's why when people go on these things, they shouldn't come off till they no longer need the benefit of them, whatever that benefit happens to be, whether it's their muscle size they want for bodybuilding or whether it's their performance in the field as a soldier. You don't come off once you go on. I don't recommend it. Bad idea. All right, next question. Eating with heavy work schedule, it's gotten to the point where my maintenance is above 3,500 calories and it's becoming hard to force feed myself during windows where I'm not working. I don't bro eat in the slightest. I drink about 1,500 of these calories just because I get so full. Any advice? Focus on progressive eating. Now for me, I'm always the opposite. For me, every single component of my diet is structured around stopping myself from overeating. Because to me, you're talking about 3,500 calories being a lot. I can't envision being full and not being hungry on 3,500 calories. That's just outside of my realm of experience. I can't even envision that. I starve on 3,500 calories of even bro food. But what I generally recommend for someone in your situation, focus on progressive eating. Keep eating that amount of food. Rotate through different foods. When you start finding certain foods get bland, you don't like them, switch to something else. You might want to increase the fat in your diet as well. More peanut butter, more nuts, and more just liquid fatty calories like heavy cream if you need to. That's a fantastic way for you to get more calories in that situation if you're really struggling with it. And again, it depends on the person. A lot of times I would say that that's not the case. That a lot of people, that extra carbs will stimulate their appetite. But for someone like you who feels like they're full on 3,500 calories or anything over, with 1,500 of it being liquid, you're the opposite direction. You're the chronic undereater. For you, consuming more fat calories is going to help you tremendously. Whereas for people who struggle with their appetite, carbohydrates are going to tend to stimulate their appetite more. So for you, again, more fat calories in a easily chewable and digestible form, heavy cream, peanut butter, things like that. All right, next question. Has your stance on BFR, that's blood flow restriction / occlusion training, changed at all since your initial video heavily criticizing it? I'm still critical of it. I still don't think it's a wise idea. I don't see it holding any benefits over conventional training to justify the potential risk and problems with tying tourniquets around your arms and legs when you train. However, even though I think it's ridiculous and absurd, a lot of science people are starting to promote it as research comes out. If I start to see real research, when I'm trying to keep an eye on it, and I will be up to speed on it, if I see legitimate research that looks like it's going to offer some advantage, some practical advantage that conventional training doesn't offer, then yes, my stance will change on it. So if some of you want me to see that, post the actual new data, the studies on my Facebook fan page wall. Don't send them to me in private. I don't read my private messages. I get over 100 a day. I don't have time to read them. Post it on the wall if you've got studies and new studies done in the last year for me to look at, so that I can assess it better if there's something that I've missed in the literature. I'll be more than happy to give an honest review. And if it turns out to actually have a real advantage, then I will be the first person to be up there promoting it and screaming its praises. But until I see that advantage that's very clear to me and has a practical application, the extra work and risk around it do not seem to be worth it. All right, next question. Tips for lagging shoulders. I do most of the basics for shoulder development and train all three heads, but I can't seem to get metabolic fatigue in any of them. I understand your pain there. For me, obviously the two muscles that I struggle the most with are my delts and my biceps. I require additional special work for those. And I'm going to recommend for you is pick the 3 most efficient exercises for those heads that also have some compound components to work other things in order to get full development. Because if you struggle with delts, you're actually going to have to hammer all 3 heads. I'm going to recommend number 1, behind the neck presses is your main compound movement for them if they're lagging. Number 2, I'm going to recommend that you do some sort of side lateral raise with either cables or with dumbbells, but what you need to do not do the pinky up that bodybuilders recommend. That destroys your rotator cuffs. You need to keep the thumb up more when you do them so that you can work that medial head with less risk of damaging a rotator cuff. And then I'm going to recommend that you do face pulls for your rear delts, preferably with bands, but if you don't have access to bands, then use cables. But those 3 exercises done correctly are going to probably be your best bet to bring up lagging shoulders. And you need to hammer them frequently. Don't do those once a week. You probably need to be doing that stuff 3 times a week until your lagging shoulders catch up. That's actually something I'm having to do myself right now, because I know that for YouTube purposes and aesthetic purposes, that my delts are really a weak link in my physique right now. So I'm actually doing the very thing that I'm advising. And it's funny you mentioned that, because I realize it's actually a problem for me too. Just genetically my weak link. All right, next question and last question of the week. What's your opinion on Arthur Jones style high intensity training, especially as practiced by Dr. Ken? I'm not that familiar with Dr. Ken, to be honest. You guys know that for me, as far as HIIT type training goes, there are components of it that I agree with massively and some parts that I disagree with. The thing that I agree with is, can minimal amounts of volume done correctly and with enough intensity and using certain methods stimulate maximum growth? Yes, you can stimulate maximum growth with one set if you're doing some things like rest, pause, work, drop sets, things like that. If you're incorporating those methods to get metabolic fatigue deeper than muscle failure would get off of a single set, yeah, one set will help you grow. What I disagree with is the long waits between exercises. We know that the more frequently that you do an exercise, the more frequently that you train a body part, the faster it grows and adapts. And if your concern is overtraining, then that's why you regulate the volume. That's why you do one set of rest pause training, for example, because it doesn't hammer your recovery the same way that multiple sets do while still stimulating maximum growth. So you scale the volume down, don't scale the frequency down. This whole idea of training a muscle once every 7 days, unless you're using large amounts of drugs, will never produce the fastest results possible. So I would say that HIIT style training, if you want to incorporate the concepts utilized as far as the efficient end of it, of minimizing the amount of time in the gym on each workout, cutting the sets down to the bare minimum to stimulate really effective growth, I have no problem with that. I think it's good. But if that means cutting back frequency of training, no, that's bad. Ideally, I'd like to see everything trained a minimum of twice a week, more ideally 3 times a week for each body part if you really want to see maximum growth. And if you're worried about excessive overreaching or eventually overtraining, that can be regulated through the volume side of it, not the frequency side. You're going to get better results if you're drug-free or on very conservative amounts. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.